Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming along. We're going to dive straight into it because time is short. So on the panel today we have Stu Owens, Head of SEO from Blue. We also have Peter Cobley, Commercial Director from Home James. We have Heather Healy, Head of Social Media from Sticky Eyes. And Jonathan Anderson, SEO and Data Insight Manager from 26. And myself, David Wilding, Head of SEO from Blue Claw. So we're going to start off with a quick quote some of you might have heard before. Google Plus is like the gym. Everyone is a member, but hardly anyone goes. Just on a quick show of hands, how many people have a Google Plus account? Okay. Who uses Google Plus for personal use every single day? Just Martin. Who uses it about once a week? Okay, and who uses it only about once a month? And finally, who has used it once the date that they opened their account? Which is quite a few of you, which is not that surprising. So, what exactly is Google Plus? Because there's a lot of confusion in regards to what it exactly is. So this is the official definition from Google from their consumer-facing page. Google Plus makes connecting on the web more like connecting in the real world. Share your thoughts, links and photos with the right circles. Use easy, spontaneous video chat to strike up conversations with as many as 9 people at once. Get everybody on the same page with fast, simple group chat. And finally, we're very excited about the new approach to sharing we created for Google+, but this is really just the beginning. Very, very quickly, I'm going to run through some of the primary functionality within Google+, just to give context to the things that we're talking about. So you have your social stream, and that social stream is driven by your circles, and you create your circles, putting individuals into different circles, such as work, home, hobbies, etc. Like Twitter, you can put people in your circles, they don't have to follow you back, that's their choice. We also have within Google Plus Hangouts, where 9 people can all get in a group chat. With video conferencing. We also have the game section. There's also the photo section, which is like the Picasso from Google. We also have the Google Plus business pages. Then we have the Google Plus search, which is the search functionality within Google Plus. And then we have Google Plus Mobile, which is important. There's lots of apps to access it via mobile, but there's also something called Messenger, which is like a group text messaging service. And there's also instant uploads, which allows you to take a photo, and I believe it pushes it out to all of your social networks at the same time. And now finally we have Search Plus. Is that how we're referring to it? Yeah, which is the impact of Google Plus on the traditional search results. So now also, beyond that, we also have Google Plus One, which is the voting mechanism. Before we have the platform, and then there's the Google Plus One, which is the voting mechanism where you can plus one a particular web URL, or you can plus one a comment within Google Plus. I'm going to hand over to the panel now for them very quickly to give their own personal definition of what they see Google Plus being. Who would like to start on that?
Well, I'm going to sing my neck out and actually say that I think this is going to be Google's one success story. Why? Basically because this is making all those products David just mentioned, making them all socially compatible. So it's bringing them all together in one place where people can use all of them. We've seen recently they've started to cull a lot of the products that they did have before into a manageable set now. So this is really all about bringing everything together where we can use them all in one place and make them successful. And tie them in socially, which is where Google hasn't actually been successful yet.
Yeah, just echoing a lot of that. A lot of this sounds like Facebook, but not quite as good. And the more you dig into it, the more it looks like Facebook, but not quite as good. And it's something we'll come on to consistently throughout this, is that this is their attempt to consolidate, to catch up, and to turn themselves into a brand and a platform that will allow them to compete moving forwards. And there's an awful lot of half-baked ideas and half-baked functionality, but it's Google, the biggest effort we've seen from Google to produce a consistent, consolidated, single approach to anything. I mean, historically they've done 1,000 things in 1,000 different places and half of them have failed. This is their one shot to say that we're making a stand. We are recreating ourselves in the way we want to be perceived and creating a platform that will allow them to do that moving forwards.
I think Google Plus is a social network that has the biggest opportunity, and that's for both brands, companies and consumers. And that's because of its impact on search. So it's undeniable, and I guess most of the people in this room would understand how important it is to have that integration with search. And that's why the gym metaphor is great, because we're thinking, right, we know we really need to go to the gym because the gym's amazing and we all need to get fit, and it would be fantastic to use it, but really we can't be bothered to go to the gym. We can't really be bothered to do these things. The challenge really for the consumer is that they don't really understand the metaphor for the gym breaks down there, because they don't really understand why they need to go to the gym. Why is Google Plus any different to Facebook? Why is it any different to any other platform? Is the concept of search plus your world actually compelling enough for a user to go to Google Plus?
Being a commercial guy, I'm going to look at Google Plus in a very different way. So I'm a salesman by trade, unfortunately. I work in advertising, we all work in advertising. So we are here because we deal in advertising for our clients. It's that simple. I'm obviously putting a very simple spin on it. At the end of the day, I think Google Plus marks Google's attempt, and I'm ex-Yahoo, to try and catch up with Facebook. It was second to marketplace, no different from years back when BOL or Bertelsmann tried to take on Amazon with BOL.com. Personally, I'm going to be interested to see what happens with Google Plus. It's got a high number of users, but the engagement is very poor. And people have probably read the stats that just come out recently in terms of the actual minutes spent in January compared to previous months for Google Plus and when compared to Facebook. At the end of the day, I did a little bit of research, and this sort of from a company perspective, not a personal perspective. Coca-Cola has about 41 million likes on Facebook. As of yesterday, it's got about less than 1,500 on Google+. So I think this is their attempt to try and shift revenue, I suspect, as well as usability, off sponsored links into another product that we can harness advertising around. The question I've got is, will that work in terms of engagement? And secondly, if any of you run Facebook advertising, as my agency has, what's been the return on investment from that? As a personal user who's got his own blog and so forth and so on, I find it clunky when compared to Facebook, and I'm not necessarily convinced this product's got legs. It's got a critical mass in terms of numbers, but if those numbers don't do anything, then it's irrelevant at the end of the day. It's all about content. So for example, down in the London days when I worked at ITV, if you've got the content there, you'll sell TVRs. If you don't, you won't. So from a commercial point of view, my attitude is to the clients is set a Google Plus account up. That's important, but wait to see what happens. I think there is definitely an impact on the search results. I think what Google's trying to do is reverse engineer usage. So for example, they've had a spat with Twitter, they're now putting Google Plus listings within the natural search so that the user clicks on them, they'll then have some form of engagement, and hopefully that will stem from there. At the end of the day, excuse my French, we could put a dog poo outside Malmaison with a Google label on it and somebody would pick it up. Doesn't necessarily mean somebody's going to engage with it. So my question has been quite crude and old style sales is, can you polish a turd? And that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, fantastic. I broadly agree with everything that people have said there. To put simply for me, Google Plus is their response to Facebook. If you do the SWOT analysis of Google, and we're looking at what their weaknesses, what's a threat for them as an organisation, very much it's that social platform which they haven't got, and ergo that social data to deliver better search results. And this is all part, really, what Peter was getting at, as a long-term strategy for them, the battle of the platforms to ensure that they've got those users so they have those eyeballs so they can sell advertising, in effect, as I see it. So that's great. Something I should have mentioned at the start of this, this is supposed to be very much an interactive session, so at any point, if you want to ask a question, just put your hand up and I'll come over to you and we'll take your question. So we understand what Google Plus is now. So really the next question is, who is on Google Plus at the moment and why are they on it? Who are the early adopters? Why are they there? Why are they using it? What are the current rates of adoption and usage? And how can Google go about improving that? Who would like to take that general point and run with it? Peter?
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to hog the conversation, so I'm not a social media type. I'm a salesman, so I talk about space and the rest of it. Just from doing some research yesterday, one thing I noticed that it's Google at the moment, I'm assuming from early adoption, is a bit of a sausage fest. So it's male biased by about 3/4 in terms of demographic profile, with I think self-confessed about 23–24% of them in terms of engineers. So for me, that kind of profile, I think, does show early adoption of a new product. And from an advertising point of view, in terms of actually trying to sell it into clients, that to me is difficult. I don't know if the panel's got anything else to say on that.
I think the challenge with early adopters is they're always in a specific user group. So if we look at Facebook as a good example of that, we know that it was all very clicky. It was the college-based people. It wasn't your grandma, but now it is. And I mean, I think the thing is we're quite harsh on Google. You know, they've got 90 million members. Great, they're not using it. You know, they're only using it for 3 minutes a week, whereas people are using Facebook 7.5 times, 7.5 hours a week. But the real challenge is when Facebook reached the mass where it got past the initial adopters, group, that was at 120 million. So, you know, we need to understand that to get to that point, they've got to go from 90 million to 120, and then maybe we can have a fair observation of where they've gone past new adopters and the early groups.
So, just to say, you don't think we're past that stage at the moment?
Absolutely not. I think it's very early stages. I think there's always going to be the challenge. From my perspective, my focus is always think about where the consumer is and target them there. It's really straightforward logic. But the thing with Google Plus is actually the brand needs to be there first before the consumer for the Google Plus to actually take off. And that's where Google are really trying to go, come on brands, come on celebrities, please come here. And that's when your consumers will arrive. It's Facebook were in a very unique position to start with those great early adopters who were passing the feeling around that it was cool to be on Facebook. But that is such a unique situation. Google will never be able to replicate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we ask who in here is on Google Plus, it's everybody. I mean, there might be a few people, but generally speaking, we are the people who are on Google Plus, and we are the people who are, to some greater or lesser degree, connected to the digital marketing industry, to activities around that. We're the people who are on there. I imagine there's a degree of burnout around social media platforms. We all have the Facebook thing, we all went through the MySpace thing, we all went through the Twitter thing. We have a finite amount of time and attention, and especially clients. This is the latest in a long line of things, half of which haven't worked. It really needs to show that it's a viable platform before people really engage with it. But it won't do that unless we make it happen. And I think it's at a really interesting point where we are the people who are on it and engaging with it and saying to clients and our friends, well, it's not quite there yet. Maybe it's not quite there yet because we're not allowing it to progress, because we're cynical and we're a bit bored of this game.
Just to sort of echo those points, really, I think what's important to see from this as well is the rate of adoption it has acquired in such a short space of time. So now I think with the latest stats from the Google guys saying about 90 million users, and they were saying about 60% of those are actually engaged using it, which I don't actually know how long they spend.
53% are just playing games.
Just play games, right? So it's still in its beta stage, and it's still more or less US based. It's not actually, there's a lot of functions that haven't rolled out to the UK yet. So I think there's a lot that's still yet to happen that we're not going to see for quite a while. But we can experiment with it at this point at the moment. So
definitely. So we'll move on to the next question in a moment, but based on what you guys have just said then, is it a waste of time? Is it worth engaging on it currently?
I don't think it's a waste of time. I completely agree with what you said. I just think it's early doors. It's a brand new product within reason. It's been adopted by clearly a tech audience. I'm just not convinced, in my personal opinion, at hasty time, that it's going to have the same legs that Facebook had by virtue of the fact that Facebook was first to marketplace. Google is synonymous and associated with search. That's its double-edged sword. So I'm not necessarily convinced that the additional product rollouts that they've had will necessarily shift it away from search.
So the question is really now is how is this going to happen? How are Google going to encourage people to get into this platform and use it? And that kind of brings us on to the area where we compare Facebook to Google Plus and the other platforms and their pros and their cons, etc. Now for me, we'll do. Who, when they first went on Google Plus, found it confusing? Honestly. And this is a room full of mostly technical people, isn't it, or people in agencies. Is that a barrier to entry, do you think, for a lot of potential users coming onto Google Plus from Facebook? And would you like to take that point?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I think the thing is with Facebook is it originally started to be very clunky. So did Twitter. People go to Twitter and are confused by it. You know, consumers, I guess, will be confused by Google Plus in the same way, but I actually think it's quite slick. If you look at it and you look at how you can organise people into circles, it looks really straightforward. And you know, Google are there to give you all that hand holding. So I think saying, you know, that the platform itself is a bit clunky, fair enough. Google have been opening that that admission as well and saying, you know, we know that this isn't the full deal, this isn't the full picture yet. But you know, the differentiation between that and Facebook has to come in a different way. So Google Plus has to work slightly differently for the everyday consumer to be interested in it.
I think, I mean, initially, the difference, when it first rolled out, it was literally just Facebook. I mean, there wasn't that many things that were different from how Facebook appears. So Google did a good job with showing lots of videos as well, how all the different things work. You know, see how you work with circles, see how it works with the huddles and everything else. So they have really made an effort to try and show how it can work. But it's really how those people who use Facebook all the time, how they're going to think, why should I move to Google? I think that's what is the biggest thing.
Can I just ask out of interest, who heard of and was familiar with Google Wave? Wow, who used it? Yeah, that was really well promoted, was not quite finished, was a bit clunky, could well have changed the world and went away because nobody adopted it, because everyone was waiting for everyone else to adopt it.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it was mentioned before, Facebook took off because it was based on a student, young audience, and crowd. Twitter, to an extent, actually was, for my money, we can disagree, was based very much on a technical, geeky crowd, and then pulled in the kids. Can Google Plus ever be hip with the kids? Are there enough unique selling points within that platform to pull people in, such as the hangouts, the games, the photos? Is that stuff good enough? What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, you know, Google. You know, I'm 40 now, and I can see my friends' kids. You know, they'll be bashing away on Google without any help from myself. So we're dealing with a different generation relative to a lot of people's ages in here. So I definitely think Google's always been hip hop. The issue I've got is whether or not the brand is going to be synonymous with. So you know, if you don't grab someone in the street, they're not going to talk the same language that we do. All they're going to think about is what's for dinner, go home, check emails, and the rest of it. If you think of Coca-Cola, you think of drink.
Is that mic turned off?
Alright. So light is on, you should be able to. Can you hear me now?
So so it's just saying, if we think of Coca-Cola, we think of drink. If we think, you know, of a soft drink. The problem is, for me, is you always associate Google with search. I'm ex-Overture at Yahoo, and when we looked at Google entering the marketplace, that was the kind of position that they went for. I think Google's definitely got it in terms of being hip hop as a brand, but in terms of what the brand stands for, I think there is an issue with it trying to go down a content route, to be honest.
Definitely. A quote I saw randomly the other day, this was from just a normal user, was, and forgive this quote, it was, Facebook is like the Jeremy Kyle show of the social world, which I think is hilarious. I think there's a lot of truth in that. Do you see, I don't know what I'm saying, do you see a day when people will solely just use Facebook or solely just use Google Plus, or will they have different audiences, different demographics, or would it be more the case that people use Twitter for that, Google Plus for that, Facebook for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the way that people use and what they're looking for and trying to achieve. And the great example here is if you try and apply the logistics and the intent behind a Google search to Facebook, if you're searching for somewhere great to eat, a great restaurant that all your friends really like, you will always find McDonald's, because they've got more social noise and more of a brand than the great little restaurant around the corner. There will always be a distinction between editorially qualified and socially voted content. There will always be a space for different kinds of behaviour. And what Google Plus is really trying to do here is take elements of that and work out how they stop being so search orientated, how they create a new hub that is about having a platform that they can do and be all of these things, at least well enough to establish a bit of a beachhead in the social territory and Facebook's territory. Otherwise, Facebook will continue to get better and better at keeping people in one place and serving them everything but search, and Google will own less and less of that online behaviour.
Yeah, could I just ask it? Thank you. So, Lawrence Alexander from Bezio. There's a lot of comparison between Facebook and the McDonald's example is a good one. It seems almost unfair to compare Google with Facebook because it's like comparing everywhere with McDonald's. But obviously, like the circles is a clear, let's say, attack at making stuff neat, making sure your boss doesn't see the same stuff your friends does, which isn't the first person to do that. LinkedIn has obviously gone into that space to say if you want a social network and you don't want your friend, you know, your boss or your colleagues to see that stuff, come to LinkedIn. And there's a lot of, let's say, LinkedIn's probably the poor cousin of social media that takes a lot of hassle. How do you think Google Plus compares to to LinkedIn, which is probably a fairer as far as market and size comparison.
And that's a very good point. Would you like to pick up on that?
I think LinkedIn is a very different engine altogether, though, isn't it? I think it's more professional people who are doing something that isn't sort of social networking, it's business networking, which is entirely very different, I think.
Yeah.
So, well, probably, I mean, it's just that it is a very different engine to what we do. I mean, the things that we share on LinkedIn are more geared towards our profiles, our people, who we are as a sort of, you know, who we are in the working world, not really what we do socially. So I think it is good to sort of differentiate them all really into what they really are. So I think what the question is here is how Google fits within all the different other networks that are available.
I think you've got to consider that the circles feature is absolutely excellent, and it does enable you to have that kind of focused approach. So, you know, if you're a journalist and you want to know what you want to know what Lady Gaga's up to, and you don't want to know her latest press release, you can go and get that information because Lady Gaga will segment out her information. But that again kind of gives you a new paradox with circles. So circles itself, you as the user and you as the brand determine who sees what content. And generally, if you want to appear in Search Plus Your World, you want to share everything publicly because you want everything to appear in Search Plus Your World. So you might not segment that out. And from a user perspective, what I want to know about Lady Gaga is what shoes she wore on stage last night, where they came from, where I can buy them from. Probably can't buy them, probably come from a butcher, but that's kind of irrelevant. I guess the key thing is, you know, as a journalist, you want to find out specific information from Lady Gaga, so you should be able to subscribe to a topic or subscribe to, you know, a specific area, and that's where Google Plus could become quite interesting in terms of the user's experience and what they want to receive rather than what you want to share with other people.
Don't we do that with Sparks?
So Sparks is a little bit of a thing that kind of looks at, you know, hot topics that you can segment out and subscribe to in different ways. It hasn't really survived because it really isn't focused on that specific individual or that specific brand. If you could actually circle someone and say, yeah, I'm circling you, but I'm interested in what you say about shoes, or what you say about you know, what's going on in your marketing calendar. If you could subscribe to specific areas of content, that's where it becomes really, really valuable because you're getting the content you want. If you go on Twitter and you follow Lady Gaga, you get everything from her. Lady Gaga is probably a terrible example. Sorry, Jamie, that's from you. But you know, any brand, you know, bakery brand or anything, you know, you want specific types of content depending on what user you are.
So when you ask people what the difference between Facebook and Google Plus is, Circles is the USP. You can categorise and organise all the people you listen to. Think back to when you started on Facebook. It was raw, you posted everything, everyone else posted everything. There was a lot of rubbish in there. And over the course of however many years you've been on it, you've gone through a process of filtering what comes into your stream and the kind of stuff you put on there. That's happened really organically over quite a long amount of time. What's happened with Google Plus is the Circles is a great piece of functionality. But the amount of time I will have to spend micromanaging and maintaining and organising and structuring and deciding how I want to craft my circles is an enormous overhead up front. I think that's one of the big barriers to people getting involved. It's really, really great that it's such a huge amount of work to get it into place.
Just coming back to the LinkedIn thing, I use that all the time. I find it a very, very useful product. Coming back to the product question, at the end of the day, we're dealing with publishing in a very, very crude way. So I think what's going to happen is you'll actually see audience clustered around products that publishers are pumping out. A good point from my background is we've got BBC 1, BBC 2, ITV, Channel 4. Why do we need 4 terrestrial TV stations? They're all doing the same thing. The point is they're pumping out different content, different audiences. So whilst that sounds very facile, I think you'll actually see product dictating audience to an extent. Twitter's a very good example of that versus Facebook. I think what you are seeing at the moment is, from a commercial point of view, is Google coming up against Facebook to get those eyeballs, those advertising eyeballs. So they've gone into a very, very tight vertical, which is social networking of social media, because there's clearly audiences clustered around these content products, such as Channel 4's audience is very different to, say, BBC 2's audience. A good example might be a new entrant to the market, which is Pinterest. Which you must admit I've not yet sent an account upon, I've just whizzed an invite out, just not had time. So I'd be interested to see how that develops, just as much as Flickr. When I was at Yahoo, it was bought, you know, it's still very, very popular in terms of photo sharing and tagging and so forth. So I think it's a bit of a question. Audience will dictate, but audience will only consume what product is pumped out. The other one for me, and again, I don't want to open a can of worms here with limited time that we've got, is what's going to be a massive driver is going to be technology and platforms. The obvious ones, mobile and tablets and so forth, and I think that's... I left Yahoo in 2008 and they were staffing up hugely on mobile teams and throwing money after money into that area. I think that's going to be a big driver.
Before we move on to the next section, one very quick question and quick answer, please. It's a tough question. If you give me a timescale when you think Google Plus will hit the mainstream in the UK, any guesses? Everyone put their neck on the line?
Palms up and better.
I think later this year. Really. That's as close as I'm going to get to a motivation.
Anyone else, or shall I move on from that? I think I'll move on. Fair enough. Okay, so the next area we're going to look at is the SEO implications of Google+. We don't want to get too caught up in the detail of this, of change this, put this there, because we're short on time. But very quickly, I'm going to run through the areas where, if you're looking at SEO for Google+, the areas that you actually will be looking to optimise. So most of you will have seen this is the traditional Google search promotion, where particular results have been +1 by friends or family have been pushed up with search results. The Google Plus box. Has anybody here seen the Google Plus box on the right hand side when you're searching Google? That at the moment isn't available in the UK. If you want to look at that, you need to go to google.co.uk, then click on the google.com button, and if you search for cars, for example, you'll see what I'm talking about there. I assume the panel have done that and have a look at that. And also we have Google Plus Your World as well, which is not in the UK yet. We have the search functionality within Google Plus. We also have the ability to optimise the Google Plus business pages as well. And then also the area of the SEO impact of +1s, if any, if there is any SEO impact of those ones. I'd like us to discuss that. And also, there's other areas as well. Has anybody had seen Direct Connect? If you go into Google at the moment, you put a plus sign, and then put any letter after that. It will bring down companies that have pages within Google Plus at the moment, and have a little icon next to them. It's like Google Suggest, but for Google Places. I'll talk about that actually. See, there's an opportunity because obviously there's not that many companies on this system at the moment, and you can try and gain that ground early doors. For example, so when somebody types in the letter E, if your brand is Egberts Limited, then you could turn up there before some of the multinationals do. Also, one other point I'll let you guys talk about, I wanted to talk about before, but we talk about so many people with vested interests on Google Plus at the moment, and thought leaders and innovators. But how many people have heard of the SEO of Michael Gray, as an example? A few of you might have. Now, if you want to talk to Rand Fishkin, etc., over Twitter or Facebook, unless you've met him in person, it's quite difficult for him to see you and notice you within all the noise that surrounds him. Now, if you want to connect with certain industry leaders, Google Plus is the way to go, because there's so many few people on there at the moment. That person is on there. You can very much more easily make yourself known to him and influence that thought leader, if that makes sense. So now we're going to come back to SEO. What we'd like to talk about really, guys, is the short-term effect. Obviously not all of this is rolled out in the UK yet. What should people be doing in the short term in terms of SEO? And then long-term, what effect is this going to have on the SEO industry? What effect will it have on strategies? Is SEO dead even? How does it affect your current content strategies and your current social strategies as well? Who would like to run with that general point?
The biggest implication is obviously search plus your world. So that's if you're on Google Plus, you will see content within your search that can come from your social graph within Google Plus. So for example, if I search for knitting, I have someone on who talks about knitting quite a lot on Google Plus. I might get a great blog post about what they're doing as a result of the information coming through Google Plus. So that's kind of the key thing. And in terms of short-term wins to appear there, those queries, those searches are text-based only. So if you search for something, you will get an immediate return that's based on text. It's not based on intent or anything further than that. So there's the real opportunity to spam a bit, to be honest. I think the key thing with Google Plus at the moment is it is quite open to spam. There is the opportunity for you to propel yourself as a person. So as an individual, optimising your profile within Google Plus can enable you to rank for a series of keywords, or to appear within those people who circle you when they search on generic or long tail terms, Hollywood or long tail terms I should say, you're more likely to appear there because Google will always put great weighting on Google+, we hope.
Something we've not said, which we probably should have covered, is we're all of an agreement that this isn't going away and it's only going to continue and go further and become more. And there's a lot of evidence that the degree to which Google have invested in this and promoting it and integrating it with all of the services is only going to increase. And the big thing that's going to change games and change the way businesses operate and change SEO is that the one USP that Google have that Facebook can't and don't and won't is that they have decided that they are the authority on authorship and that everything they do will start to incorporate and lean towards real people with real names, with real faces, with real content. So if I share a circle with somebody who, there's a great example back when Google Panda hit that if you search for oak cabinet, eBay would rank or Argos would rank, and then after Panda, the little crafter around the corner who carves them all by hand starts ranking. Great. What happens now is that he's got a blog and he has a photo and he has a face and he has a name. And if you're in his circle and you're searching for a cabinet, he's the guy who comes up and not the big brands. And the long-term implication is, from an SEO perspective, is you've got to invest in people. And if you're a brand and you're a big faceless, nameless entity, you've got to have real people who people can connect with. So your SEO strategy starts to be network with people and go to conferences and make real connections and get circled. Because then you're in their space. You don't have to worry about title tags and meta tags and content, even to a degree. This is social media. It's in that
Truly social, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it blurs that line to the point where we say SEO is search engine optimization. What happens when the search engine is no longer a search engine? When it's a social platform, what is it then? And it's all about people.
John?
Sorry.
Sorry, Steve, sorry.
Yeah, just to go to the short-term thing, I think really people should be adopting this and brands as well, because it is a chance to get in there early, but also what's important about Google Plus is having a content strategy, which I'm sure Heather will be. You need to have something that's different from what your other brand pages have for Facebook and anything else. There needs to be a reason why people go to Google Plus to interact with your brand on there. I think, Peter at the start, Google is a commercial entity, and what is this going to have impact on their PPC? So if more personalised search is going to take over, and that is pushing down all the PPC ads and everything, so where is Google's big commercial drive going to come from? So ultimately, what Google Plus is for the long term for them is a way of making world's first commercially viable social network, making lots of money from it. So we'll see how that develops. Long term for SEO, this is all about, as John was saying, creating circles, getting to know these influential people, creating content that is going to be attracting these people, and merging closely with social. So people baiting, not baiting. So it's the future of how things are going to develop, is that we're not just solely doing optimization for the search engines anymore, we are optimizing for people and for content and to interact with people. So that is the future of it.
Definitely, and the reason why we're saying this, really, as some people may be aware, there is going to be SEO impact, obviously, of interactions on Facebook and on Twitter as well. Now, if you plus one something at the moment, it doesn't necessarily, my understanding, doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on the ranking for individuals who are not in your circles as such. That content needs to be within the right circles. So this is what we're getting at here. In the past we talked about doing social metrics and generating those social metrics. It's relationship building now is what we're getting to. Is this scary, Peter?
No, it's just, in all fairness to Google, I know the tagline is do no evil. At the end of the day, yeah, right, okay. It is about commercial entity. At the end of the day, search is crucial to attract those eyeballs. You need good search. So at the end of the day, an algorithmic process, if there's two people down in the bar downstairs and they don't be talking to each other, and one of them says, do you think the Mona Lisa is enigmatic, or do you think she's got a face on a slack bottom? A search engine can't answer that. So in all fairness, what we're seeing as well from a technical point of view is just the development of algorithmic search into emotive opinion or human-based reasoning, being able to answer those difficult questions, and ultimately it leads into peer-to-peer as well. At the end of the day, we've all seen the research, which is people will buy off the back of a personal review and say a manufacturer waxing lyrical about their product. So in one sense, what they're trying to do is harness peer-to-peer recommendations effectively, and I think what they will do is tie together peer-to-peer with the paid-for advertising just through the actual process, which comes back to the fact that they're not going to let that revenue disappear. So ultimately, you will see possibly an influence of what will appear in the natural beginning to affect what appears on the PPC. So effectively going beyond keyword, going beyond the cost of the PPCs, then you might begin to see the algorithm tweet, or what we all know as quality score, to actually be reflective of natural. But then again, all of that stuff is so hidden. I'm not the right person to ask on a sales guy, but that's kind of the information I've got.
You look at the kind of way Facebook are doing that sort of thing, where you can do things like FacePal. Anyone who's liked or signed up for an app or engaged socially, you can put their faces on your site. So if I go onto a website where people in my social groups have engaged with that brand, their faces are all over that. It's not hard to envision Google Plus doing something with that on PPC ads, and they're going to get a kind of click through. If my friend's got his face plastered all over this saying, I love this result, more likely to click that one than another one, so that's wholly feasible.
Author rank, you touched on this before, Joe. Would you just like to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so millions and millions of people interacting on Google, creating content, voting each other's content up. What we'll start seeing, and what we're already seeing in a lot of spaces, is people trying to work out where authority resides in that space. I think Twitter's a really kind of crude example of how this works. But it's not hard to envision Google trying to understand how important people are in different verticals, how much of an expert they are on different subjects, and start to apply that across search results within your circles, within your content. And the thing Google have done with Search Plus Your World is forced you as an author to validate yourself through their system, and then they can use you and their understanding of you and your expertise to start plotting that in their social graph and understanding it. It becomes all about the individual.
Fundamentally, it comes down to great content and great authors. So, the rules it's a really straightforward rule again, but it's great content that can be shared, that shares will go into Google Plus. That'll happen right now. A really good lolcat is probably trailing its way around Google Plus right now, but the key thing is, when that content is shared by an important author in the eyes of Google, that's where it gets its extra value. That's where it spreads, and that's where more people have access to that content. So fundamentally, it comes down to the same old rules: great content strategy, great content, great deployment, great authors, fundamentally great news for Google Plus.
Blind5yearold.com. If you visit that website, they've probably got the best article there in terms of Google Plus and SEO and practically implementing it. Can't really get into the details in this because it would just bore you all to death. But if you go to blind5yearold.com, you'll find a fantastic article on there. It's long, but it is worth reading through it, honestly, guys. There's a lot of takeaways, and that's how we're going. Well, we're pretty short on time now, so.
Just a quick question, because you keep talking about authors, and we've all seen that in the results, but as it's bringing together things like YouTube's using recognition of voice and image and everything else, do you see a point where maybe TV presenters like someone like Ray William Johnson might become an authority in what videos are popular, rather than just written?
Yes. So, does anyone want to expand upon that point at all? Yes, it's the simple answer. That's definitely going to happen. It's just a matter of when, really.
And the fact is, he should be, because he is.
Yes.
And currently the algorithm isn't capable of understanding that and using it and applying it to people's search results, but it should be, and it will increasingly become more capable of doing that, and that's where it's going.
Okay, very quickly. We've just got. I need a question. Hi, Kirsty.
Obviously, in kind of the States in particular, this is perhaps Google's most aggressive shift in terms of potential search visibility. Do you think that's actually going to have a negative effect on result relevancy, in the short term at least?
Absolutely, particularly if you circle a lot of people, you're going to have just absolutely loads of content that comes from your circles that might not actually be relevant to you. So the way that they can improve on that potentially is looking at when you input a query that's related to a specific topic, for example photography, you have results that return from users who are relevant to that category, so that you don't have that literal just first page domination of Google Plus where it's just completely irrelevant stuff. So I think in the short term they really need to work on that, because if you do circle a lot of people, you will probably notice that Search Plus Your World is just dominating the SERP unnecessarily.
Okay, very quickly, we'll try and cover the last point as quick as we can. We kind of already touched on this. How I describe this, what I see happening at the moment, we have Microsoft, Apple, Facebook and Google, and they're all battling to become the platform of choice, be that on your mobile phone, your tablet, your TV, your washing machine. So now, and the reason they're doing that is because they want eyeballs for advertising. They're tying people in for their phones and tablets. Now, at the moment, you could argue Facebook is an immersive browsing experience for the user, and you could also argue that Google is a bit disparate in some senses. So really, I'm just looking for comment from you guys in terms of the long-term strategy of Google Plus and their offerings. And are people going to join in, and who will win this battle long term, if that makes sense? And obviously, if you want to touch upon the scheme stuff as well, the authorship, that'd be great.
So Facebook have already won the web. They are already everywhere. They're already on everybody's website. You can like things, you can share things, there's buttons, there's widgets. They have already won. What they haven't won is the curation of that. They aren't as good as Google at understanding authority and relevance, and this is Google's attempt to own that slice of the pie. And they'll try and establish a beachhead back into Facebook's area of expertise through things like authorship and the use of schema markup, which is an extension of that, where we're saying, let's understand the context of the web. This is a page about a music video, this is a page about a cheesecake recipe, and starting to get really clever at understanding that. But Facebook are already there, and they're already miles ahead of Google. So Google's only option is to try and get enough of that pie through authorship to not lose it entirely, but then to reposition themselves as this curation platform where you say, I like this, I like him, I like them, and get that to power their immersive platform.
Peter, closing thoughts?
The web, within reason, is actually a mature form of media. It's a mature channel, so the battle's already been fought over. I don't want to use the word battle. The next way forward for people who want some money in terms of publishing is what I class as the platform area or hardware, basically. So you've got to ask, where's the content being consumed? It's on a tube train, it's in this perm, it's going to be people foursquaring and all sorts and so forth. So what we need to look at in terms of Google is where is it going? It didn't just buy Motorola just for the sake of having a load of money in the bank. Do not underestimate the impact that platforms will have on the delivery of content, even if that content's a bag of whatever. So I'd say mobile, definitely, tablet, or if you want to keep it short and sweet, technology on the hoof and so forth, and interactive technology, you know, the fridge that's got the TV in and so forth. There's a lot of investment going into that.
Well, I think just close it really, I mean, we've got to look at Google's reach in terms of, I mean, Facebook has got the majority of people using it and people spend most time there, but if you're looking at the reach, what, 800 million is it now, Facebook users? But Google really reaches far beyond that, into the billions. So all they have to do is make this worthwhile for us to be there, and then next thing you know, we're all using it whether we like it or not. All they have to do is to start forcing us gently into being signed in whenever we're doing anything from Google, or actually to use it in the first place, you need to be signed in. And then all of this starts to make sense long term. So that is the biggest thing for us, as well as the mobile. Android is rapidly becoming sort of grabbing market share in terms of smartphones. It's already linked in with Google Plus. It's already making it easy for people to share their content through their mobile. So that's a big area.
This is the point that Simon made when we met before, but for me, products don't actually go mainstream until even people on low incomes can afford them, really, in my personal opinion. But we're almost there now with the smartphone and Android, whilst we're not there with, arguably, with the iPhone, as I see it, because it isn't as affordable. So does anybody from the audience have any questions for the final few minutes that they've got burning issue? There's a gentleman there.
I was hoping you might be able to give me a bit of advice, because I've got some clients and it's quite easy to set them up with a Google brand page and so on, but the power of Google Plus seems to be definitely in authors and stuff, and actually motivating them to do stuff on Google Plus and create circles and basically create that network of people so that they affect search is incredibly difficult at the moment. I was wondering if you have any tips on how to overcome that?
It's part of a bigger trend that SEO is getting harder and harder to outsource and to do externally, and more about actually deserving to be in that position and attracting those consumers by doing the right thing and doing the business, having a service, having a great product to start with, and increasingly, we all know SEO, we can talk about tactics till the cows come home, but until you actually get any of that done, what's the value of it? And increasingly that's the bottleneck, is educating clients and hand-holding them and showing them little wins in little areas and showing return. Unfortunately, Google Plus isn't mature enough to really achieve that yet. So when you're talking about Facebook, yeah, do something really small and show that it works, and then do something bigger. But it's just not there yet enough to prove that.
I think I had the exact same problem with Facebook a few years ago, so you'd be surprised, you know, how poorly people responded to why on earth should I be on Facebook, and now it's an absolute no-brainer. Well, not for all clients actually. There is still some resistance to Facebook. The great thing that we can do in terms of understanding SEO is proving the SEO impact and showing that the need to do that is just as important, if not more important, than populating content and producing great content for Facebook, because it actually matters, and because you can, in this instance, which is a really unique situation to be in, particularly with social media, is saying there is a commercial output and there is actually a return on investment for you doing this, which is music to my ears, to be honest.
Definitely. That's fantastic. Unfortunately, unless the audience has any questions, we've pretty much run out of time now. Anybody else like to ask anything? Yeah, can you...
Obviously, everyone had Facebook privacy and how Google's Facebook privacy issues. How are Google going to overcome privacy and get involved about things like their personal data to spread around?
The privacy issues that we've had, did you hear that question, guys? Who'd like to take that? Anyone?
I think it's a really, really difficult one because it's in flux, it's developing. I mean, I think all of us a few months back were sort of running around like headless chickens over the EU cookie directive as one example. The answer to the question we advise our clients, or when I get asked, is just watch the space in terms of the client side, in terms of how Google and the other publishers have to be regulated because they are publishers. So how they're going to deal with it, I think, will be subject to what the EU pushes out, what the States pushes out, and so forth and so on. For the actual clients, just spinning it to the clients, they're just going to have to watch the space as well. I think it's going to be a combination of dealing with the regulatory authorities, their own policy, and see what users do and don't like.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along and for the panel to give up their time today. It's really appreciated. Round of applause. And I hope you guys in the audience found it useful as well. I'm sure there'll be another one of these shortly.
There will be. I'd like to just add a few quick notes. It'll take about a minute. I think also thank you to you for giving your lunch up as usual. Just give yourself a quick round of applause. Yeah. I'd like to thank Claire, Darren and Leanne for helping on the doors as well. I'd like to thank Bloom for paying for this, which is quite easy because the man who pays for it sits to my left at work. I'd like to thank the Adelphi as well, who have been brilliant and set all this up for us as well. Much love to those guys for helping us keep these going as well. I'd like to thank Ben at the front who's shooting this, and we'll put the video online. There's no pressure there. Cheers. Just to make you aware, if you like search, and who doesn't? That's slightly in joke. Think Viz is this weekend at the Lear. If you haven't got a ticket for that, maybe consider it. There's also another search conference in Leeds on the 18th of April, which is Ion Search, which you may want to consider going to as well. Phil was sticking these posters to my face. Plans are also afoot for a regular search night. Sounds great. It will be great. It will be great because I'm helping organise it, so it'll be fun, and there will be SEO bingo involved. What? It was your idea a few months ago.
It sounds like a terrible dating experiment.
Hey, do you like PPC? Me too. So if you're interested in that, we will be using those of you who come from Eventbrite, and we're trying to get that in place with the cross keys in about 4 weeks' time. So if you're in the search SEO industry within this city, consider coming along to that for something that's informative and entertaining in equal measure and has real ale. I've been asked to plug the Big Chip Awards, which I wasn't even aware of, and they had a get-together last week at the Round Foundry. It's free to entry for the first two. If you go to Google and type in Big Chip Awards, it comes up near the top, so that's good.
Unless you've served somebody else who's...
And Wednesday the 7th of March, there's a Leeds Digital Festival, whatever that is, meeting to talk about this year's Leeds Digital Festival, which I will have no part in after last year. I will, don't worry. And just to finish off, in a month's time, on Tuesday the 27th of March, we'll be having the next digital lunch here, and that will be about branding and using branding online. I have looked into my little black book, and hoodwinked 5 great branding experts to come and talk about branding and how you use that online. So the kind of insight that people actually pay 200 quid an hour for, according to what one of the people said to me. So we'll be emailing about that early next week with the invites. And if you're an organisation that fancies sponsoring that event, please give me a shout, because then we can make sure it's free as well. So thank you very much to all you guys for coming. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to Dave for cheering. Thank you to Delphi. Thank you very much.